Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Brian if you're new around here, and if you're a returning subscriber, welcome back Soul Nation. For watching today's video, you unlock the title of Star Lord, so congratulations on your latest achievement. Hope you enjoy cruising the galaxy in style. This is part 4 of this series. We've been covering all the interviews over on We Are Vana'diel, which is Final Fantasy XI's site, as they prepare for the 20th anniversary. My heart, my hope, there's a lot of excitement and a lot of nervousness about whatever they end up announcing next year. So I have my expectations set to nothing. So if they announce anything more than nothing, I think that's going to be a win in my book. But the heart wants what it wants. But anyway, this is part 4. We've been covering these interviews. The link to the article is in the description, so that way you can read it for yourself if you don't necessarily want to listen to me kind of ramble on about it. But that's the nature of the content, so hopefully you guys enjoy. If you're new around here and you haven't hit subscribe, and this is the video that gets you to do it, sound off in the comments below so I can officially welcome you to the channel. Now, what this is going to focus in on, the interview, if you haven't seen part 3, focusing on Dragon Quest X. Yosuke Saito here is the producer of Dragon Quest X Online. He's also a fellow Final Fantasy XI adventurer, and this seems to be going to be focusing on the motivation, effects, and the outcomes, how motivation affects the outcomes of projects. And so, yeah, we're just going to go ahead and dive right in. And yeah, let's just have some fun, guys. So, Mr. Saito, what are your core values as a game developer and producer? I'm not sure if this falls under as a producer, but as someone who's involved in the creative industry, I think whether I feel like I'm having fun with the project or it's rather important. Creating a game takes an extremely long time, and during that period, there are many times where you feel like you just can't continue, or your motivation is in shambles. I think this is true for any project, but game development especially. As an aside, I always kind of factor that as the 4th pillar of game development. Typically, when they talk about project management, time, money, and resources. So do you have the people, do you have the time, and do you have the money to complete the project? The 4th pillar when it comes to game development is passion. Do you have the passion to do it? Because any studio can go in and say, throw money at a project and then end up getting kind of a blasé kind of game. We've seen that happen time and time again, but you got to have that passion, and that really bleeds through, I think, to the game and to the gamers itself. If the project wasn't fun or something I was forced to do, I think I would just give up midway. As such, whether or not I enjoy working on it with a particular person is another thing I look for. Are you talking about the team's ability to remain highly motivated as they work on a project? That's one way to put it. To simplify it further, it's about whether or not I myself am able to pull through. If I can't pull through, the people following me will inevitably also be unable to pull through. Quite frankly, the first thing I think about is whether I can hold myself accountable for the project till the very end. Is it a difficult in game development in that environment? I can't say for certain, but I presume there are people out there working on something that they don't really want to do. I can't speak for other workplaces, but I can also think that the number of people involved in overall projects is quite a large effect. When it comes to huge projects with the big team, the staff members at the bottom of the ladder tend to have few responsibilities, so there may not be that many people who remain highly motivated as they work. On the opposite end, I think that as people at the top start to rely on past successes and logical theories as their responsibilities increase, they tend to lean towards what is currently best-selling games are doing, if you know what I mean. And we see this happen over and over again. It's one of the reasons why, like, you see so many games come out in the same kind of theme, because it's tried and true. We saw World of Warcraft hands down do this to the MMO industry, and I think honestly, at the end of the day, for all the things that it did well, I think now it holds the industry back, but that's just my personal opinion. All right, it's a business, so of course. Right. In fact, if they don't have that basic understanding, they might not be able to join us on the side that always enjoys game development. But focusing on logical reasons and why a game is fun, or aligning with the market options of what will sell, isn't all that important compared to the feeling of, this is going to be fun, let's do it, which motivates the team. If there's really a logic for why games sell, every game would be successful. Since games are created by human hands, often that sort of impulse leads to an improvement in the quality of the game. There are several milestones during the development process where you just have to hang in there. Whether or not you can keep that initial impulse during these or those points is crucial. If you burn out, you might end up with something like 5 or 10 points, whereas the same team might even achieve something very close to 100 points depending on their emotions. It's pretty much about having the gut. Things like agile development are nice and all, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to guts and effort. After having gone through several rounds of the industry, what I consider to be absolutely a necessity. Now, for those who don't know, agile development is a methodology in how you develop programs, especially in terms of like long-running living service-based programs. You can use it for all kinds of methods. The other method that I'm very well acquainted with is waterfall, in which you get all the requirements and then eventually you then deliver a living project. Whether you do waterfall, agile, there's no guarantee success with one methodology over another. However, CEOs and different executives often think that there is, and it all really comes down to, I think, when he puts it, guts and effort at the end of the day. So no matter which one you choose to use, both have their strengths and weaknesses. But I've seen people say that, oh, we're an agile firm, and that means we're going to be a success. It's like, well, I mean, you're agile, and then you never release anything because you're so agile, you change your mind every, 2 months, and there you go. So I'm glad they kind of point that out. So what's the answer that you came up with? There are other developers who succeed in more clever ways, and the role of the producer isn't really something that you can write off a manual for. So I don't know what the correct answer is supposed to be. My methods are simply one way of doing things, and that's just what I prefer. Also, it's just my way of doing things and not something I always expect my teams to follow. If a person directing can convey their direction for the team, and then that's what I'll go with. With that said, the period right before mastering is still guts and effort. Director first, I have often heard you say. Passing on the role of producer. Mr. Saito, you stepped down as Dragon Quest X's online producer in August 2018. Please tell us how you felt at the time and how you currently see Dragon Quest X Online. I was already considering passing the role to someone else starting 2 years prior. I may have been at the very top of Dragon Quest Online hierarchy, but from my perspective of the people working under me, I was simply in the way of their respective career paths. It's difficult for projects with 2 or 3 leaders to succeed, and I believe that the project should have a single leader, so I felt that the career path of Dragon Quest X Online's producer should be opened up for someone else. So little by little, I asked a number of candidates, do you want to try being the producer of Dragon Quest X Online, even if it's completely different from your current role? It was then that I was told by Yakoma, the technical director turned into the producer of X Online, was also that although he may be the main programmer of Dragon Quest Online, his next role could be the main programmer of another project, or even the director or a top engineering member within the entire company. I then asked him what sort of career path he had in mind. So, Mr. Akoma was one of out of several candidates. What I had watched was with Akoma to take over the line of producer's sort of position, where he would oversee the efficiency development workflows, one of his strong suits. Outside of facing tasks such as promotional and community management roles, they could be handled by a second leader. Earlier, I mentioned that I didn't think that it was good to have 2 leaders, but I thought that it might be okay since this was an unfamiliar territory for Akuma, and the 2 roles were separate from each other. However, Akuma said, I'll accept the role if you allow me to take care of the outside-facing tasks as well. And that worked for me too. So I had him take over as producer. At the time, I actually half considered remaining as Dragon Quest X Online's producer so that I could keep getting paid comfortably until retirement. But since Akuma said that he could do it, I decided to leave things to him and we began preparations. So Mr. Saito, some of your readers may be unfamiliar with your humor, so I just like you to make sure that you're joking, right? No, those were my true feelings at the time. This is a weird way for me to say it, but if you have an important position in Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest, you end up with numerous connections both inside and outside the industry, and there are many experiences that you learn from. In some extreme cases, the names Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest hold more weight to them than certain companies compared to just Square-Enix. Either way, there are advantages that come with being an important role in Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest, so it's worth considering when an opportunity presents itself. They certainly come with a lot of pressure, but I still think it is worth it. At this point, do you view Dragon Quest X Online as an outsider? Yes, nowadays I am only relevant when I'm invited to anniversary events and the like, so to liven up the crowd. I've distanced myself from the project similar to how you might cheer on a grandchild from the sidelines. Besides, wouldn't it just be irritating if I were to step over and offer opinions all the time? Also, if I were to play the game, I would inevitably have all sorts of comments to make, and anything I say might have more weight than just a player's ramblings. That's a fun translation. It's like, oh yeah, players' ramblings, baby. With that in mind, I've refrained from playing the game, despite my desire to do so. Well, if I were to be asked to participate in a tournament or something, I'd probably bawl my eyes out while I practiced to death, since I couldn't go without preparing at all. So your stance is to watch from the sidelines unless you receive an emergency signal. Mr. Matsui, how do you feel when you succeeded in the producer position from Mr. Tanaka? So I intended to stick with the development side of things, so when I was approached for the producer role, I was unsure if I'd fit into the job. With that said, I also felt that it was my job to keep Final Fantasy XI's team together and ease concerns for those who were enjoying 11, so that I decided to accept the offer and do the best that I could. That must have been where Mr. Tanaka saw in you and he asked you to take over. After taking over as producer, I've gained the confidence to speak with the media and boldly say that I'll attend events. I've learned from my various experiences, which were largely provided through being permitted to become Final Fantasy XI's producer. And in the past, in company reports, I believe Mr. Saito spoke about how he struggled with a growing successor and mentoring newcomers. That was probably because when I was younger, I felt like the higher-ups were preventing us from moving up the ladder. And at my current age, I believe that the later generations feel the same way. I think it's important positions should be given to people who have the ability and or the desire to lead. There are some amounts of pressure that comes with the important roles in Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, but you're saying that you should just watch from the sidelines or only give a subtle guidance. I have no intentions of giving unsolicited advice, but if they ask for my opinion, I think I can give some level of advice as someone who's been around longer. But taking matters into my own hands would deprive them of the opportunity to do things on their own, so that's probably not what I should do. I think it's important that we let people handle themselves since they've learned the most when they take responsibility and make their own decisions. Regardless of who put in charge of Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest as a game, whether it would be a mainline title or a spinoff, I don't think it would turn out too horribly. But if we were talking about a completely brand new title, there's a chance that 10 out of 10 attempts turn out terrible. In my opinion, the people who have experienced the higher positions are the ones who should try new things. So I personally believe that people like Naoki Yoshida, producer of Final Fantasy XIV and 16, and Katsai, the brand manager for the Final Fantasy series, should immediately step away from the Final Fantasy series and start a brand new IP, meaning intellectual property for those who don't know, because no matter how you think about it, the more they are likely to succeed. They certainly have their reputations as producers, but they're also quite skilled at handling the issues as they arise during development. Putting someone with little experience in charge of making a brand new bestseller IP is incredibly unreasonable. Even with someone like us, you could probably have at least a 30% chance of making a brand new good IP. I believe the previous spoke about how many more new games you could develop during your lifetime as a developer. I personally enjoy pioneering new directions over walking down a beaten path. Considering that, I think that I maybe got 2 or 3 more titles in me aside from what I'm currently in charge of. Dragon Quest X Offline was announced. What about 11? On a different topic, Dragon Quest X Offline was announced the other day. What are your thoughts about making an offline version of an online game? From what I understand, the scenario of Dragon Quest X Online has been very popular, so I'd often thought about an offline version that should be released. With Dragon Quest XII on the horizon, I thought it was amazing that they announced 10 Offline after so much time has passed since 10 Online's launch. We knew that no matter how popular 10 Online became, there would always be a group that can't play online games. So I thought it was interesting that they were addressing this and thought it may be or have an obvious choice if they wanted more people to play 10. With that being said, it's interesting to see how they went out of their way to add an offline to the title. I imagine they put it here to emphasize that it's an offline version of an online product. Additionally, I think the characters' appearances are based on preference, so I think that they have the choice to continue with that same appearances of the characters from 10 Online or change it up a bit more, but I guess it all comes down to what they decide to do. With this topic, it's rather inevitable to ask, what about an offline version for Final Fantasy XI? If we were to make an offline version of 11, we couldn't just make an offline version of 11 as is. Taking into consideration, if I were to make an offline version, I'd take in the personally believe to be the exciting elements of 11 and then make a game that retains those elements but also has its own charm as an offline game. In that sense, I don't think that it could be an offline game that 11 players are asking for. Even if they were talking about remaking 11, I think that it would remake a lot of that game. I am sure that a lot of elements will need to be changed when you turn an online game into an offline game, so that seems especially difficult in the case of 11. Each person has their own concept of what 11 is, and that element is considered 11. That's probably largely different from the players who enjoyed about the game, and as if they were set aside what players thought of 11, and I was tasked with making what I envisioned as 11, and it might be fun. That's basically my current take on it. Final Fantasy XI's story is also quite popular, isn't it? Yes, I do want to keep 11's world alive in some shape or form, but that's not my area of expertise, so I'd like to leave it up to an expert. In the current Final Fantasy XI, you can level up on your own if you use trusts, and you can also progress through the story. So in that sense, it's pretty close to an offline game. The current Final Fantasy XI can be enjoyed even as a solo player, so I hope people will continue to experience the game's story. However, even if it's a relatively similar to an offline game, I still think that the presence of other players is a big part of the gameplay. You often mention that the world of 11 is only complete thanks to the presence of players. Yes, I think that it goes for any MMORPG, so that if you think Dragon Quest X offline won't be able to fully encompass all the experiences of 10 online, well, my guess is that they'll focus on some other aspect, whether it be the story or the world's atmosphere. I'm not in a position of power regarding 10 offline, so I'm just speaking for myself here, but I think that there are things that they can do because it's an offline title, just as there are things unique to online titles. So I think that they're going to capitalize on that in some way, and if not, I think that it wouldn't be good enough for players who currently enjoy 10 online, and it'd be a waste of time, a waste of creating a new game. Are you completely hands off for Dragon Quest X offline, Mr. Saito? My position in the company means that I am looking at all the titles that are released, so I'm looking at it just as another title. Currently working on a hack and slash title. Is there anything you can tell us about a new title you're working on, Mr. Saito? I'm currently overseeing a couple titles, but one that I can talk about is Babylon's Fall. It's an MO title, multiplayer online title in this regard, so it's not MMORPG. But it is a game as a service. I'm actually really interested to see how this plays out. And it's also in collaboration with the people who also make Nier. I don't know. It has not hit me. Platinum. There it is. I don't know why that took so long. As I previously mentioned, I was an avid fan of Diablo, which is one of the reasons why I became a game developer. So I always wanted to make a hack and slash title, and I wanted to make a quarter view hack and slash game like Diablo, but we formed a connection with Platinum Games, there it is written for me, through Nier Automata, and we started talking about a new game altogether. When it comes to making the ultimate hack and slash game that feels good to play, I think it would be better to capitalize on the action capabilities of Platinum Games. We have to be careful that the game doesn't turn out to be too difficult, because if we let ourselves go, we'll end up with something incredibly tough. My impression of Platinum Games is that they make flashy and satisfying action games. When we made Nier Gestalt and Nier Replicant, we had fans who said, "We want to enjoy the game, but it's too difficult for us to progress." So we asked them to tone down the difficulty for Nier Automata. If I suggested how to accomplish that, it'll be upheld as infallible. So instead, I simply asked them to add something to help players who aren't familiar with action games to help their situation, or their solution was the auto battle feature, which they cast aside their pride as an action game developer for, so I can trust them to be very grateful what they did. Babylon's Fall might have more players who are unfamiliar with action games, but are also able to enjoy Nier Automata, so I'm looking forward to the game that can be played by those unfamiliar with the genre, but can still be enjoyed deeply by action game fans. Something that caught my attention was that Mr. Iwa, former game planner involved in Final Fantasy XI's lore, is working on the scenario for Babylon's Fall. What is your suggestion? No, that was proposed by Platinum Games. My answer was basically, what? I'm down for that. That's an interesting turn of events. It was basically like, hey, I'm pretty familiar with Vana'diel. Mr. Iowa is often credited for the lore of Vana'diel, but Mr. Kato, it was in charge of the plot up until Rise of Zilliard. He was also deeply involved in world design. How did that actually split the work? We generally proceeded with Mr. Isai, primarily taking the lead. For example, I was involved with with it and created the original base for the monsters, which the battle team took and implemented for the story elements such as world design. And Mr. Kato worked together to pick and choose from everyone during those options, everyone's opinions, blah, 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 during meetings. Mr. Aikoa provided a lot of advice from the beginning regarding the design and the equipment and the map details. The world was gradually shaped as development moved forward, and it wasn't through the lore that existed at the same form of its current form, but as suggestions gave realm, realism, and historical background to the world of Vana'diel, which became a necessity with every expansion pack that we released. So, Mr. Iowa's work was to add details to the world. In the early days of development, we only knew Mr. Iowa was one of the event team members who wrote the script and the story, so we didn't have any tasks that went through him specifically. Later on, we learned about his lore-related capabilities and began to request him for more tasks of that nature. In a similar vein, Platinum Games designers came up with the lore of the world's design for Babylon's Fall, which Mr. Iwako, man, I don't know why I can't read that word. It keeps, I see a Q, like right now, and it's like the A and the O, they're joining teams. Anyway, sprinkling with realism, so I'm glad to hear our workflow is almost like what you described. Do you want to make more online games in the future, Mr. Saito? Making online games is just so difficult. When I finish a project, I think to myself, I think that's enough for me, but I'm dumb, so I forget. Do you mean you put all your effort into each project and burn out, but the enjoyment comes back after a time? I like standalone games as well, but I think my personal gaming experience, I enjoy playing with other people in other worlds. So there may be a part of me that doesn't want to let that go. Playing together with other people is in itself is fun, so I can create something that's fun to play. I think I can guarantee at least a minimum level of entertainment. Do you like non-digital games, such as board games and card games? I like those too. I tried tabletop RPGs and played those quite a bit, and nowadays I like the immersive theaters and the escape games, basically games that are played in a theme park setting. In the end, I think that I like playing with other people, and having said that, I think that it might be hard for people to believe me, but because I talk about people so much during the weekdays, I don't want to talk to people on the weekends. At my core, I'm an introverted recluse, but on Monday I forced myself to press the switch on my back and do my best until the battery runs out on Friday. And sometimes there are even events on the weekends that during my last 30 minutes of Sunday, right up until Monday, I sit down holding my knees, staring at the ceiling and reflecting on the week. I can understand that at some level you need energy to communicate with other people, and those of us who are socially active turn out to be quite shy or delicate. Now that we've talked to Mr. Sato's inner monologue, we've run out of time. Do you have any final words for Final Fantasy XI players? I have no clue what sort of activities current 11 players enjoy, but as far as I know, Final Fantasy XI is at its peak in the world of MMORPGs, so please continue to play. Please continue to support Vana'diel and tell Mr. Matsui that you should do this, you should do that. Running on that path is what runs through Saruta Baruta and leads I cannot read. Is something I still remember, and I have the desire to meet with people that I adventure back in the day and run around the world again. So I should have that opportunity. I would like to return to Vana'diel. I look forward to returning to Vana'diel again someday. We'll continue preserving the world, so please come and give us a visit. I'd like to see if they still have the muscle memory from back when I climbed Paradamo Tor and slid down the range every week. Guys, forgive me for the mispronunciations. At some point, I just kind of trip over and I just decide to fall face first into it and leave it at that. This has been an epic 4-part series, so hopefully you've enjoyed the series. I really enjoyed making it. There's so much insight into these words for me that I really just kind of resonated. It's really exciting to see. I really like the Dragon Quest X talk. I really like the Final Fantasy XI offline talk. Let me know what stood out the most to you. Babylon's Fall is coming out, I think, next year. So that's definitely on the radar. I'm very excited to see how that plays out. But at the end of the day, like, there's so much in this to unpack. I really hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching or listening. Thanks for being here. Hopefully I see you in my next video, but until then, take care.
Well, I love you too, Michelle. Shoot for the moon, and so even if you fail, you'll reach the stars. Go for the 100K subscribers. Yeah. Oh, baby.